Years ago, I started doing pulpit supply. Pulpit supply is kind of what I'm doing today. I traveled around and I would fill in when the lead minister was away or out of town. I once did it for a mentor of mine, and so I called him up wanting to show him how skillful I was, and I said his name, and I said, what does the congregation need to hear? Silence on the other end, some chuckles. Joseph. The question to ask when preaching is not what the congregation needs to hear. The question to ask is, what do you need to hear? And let other people listen in. Preach what you know. Well, what do I know? I know how to do this is so stereotypical gay guy, right? But I know how to gab sesh. I'm just going to be real with you. I know how to gab. Now, gab, if you're not familiar with the term gab sesh, it's, now young folk are probably rolling their eyes at someone my age is using this term, but gab is gossip and sesh is session. So gossip session. Now, where I learned first to do a gossip session is off of television. Whenever I was a small boy in a town of 13,000 people, television was my outlet. And I watched a popular show, perhaps you've heard of it, called The Golden Girls. Now, the Golden Girls, I'm telling you, stereotypical gay guy. The Golden Girls taught me to gab, but there's criteria for it. First, you need to get comfortable. So I'm going to be right back. Hang on one second. I need to get comfortable for this. If we're going to truly gab, if we have some good gossip to share, then we need a comfortable chair, and you need to have something to take in, right? So normally the Golden Girls had a cup of tea or something, coffee. They always, though, had, anyone? Cheesecake. Now, I'm too poor and too cheap to go and buy cheesecake just for a sermon illustration, but incidentally, my brother for Christmas gave me literally a Golden Girls mug that says, "Stay golden," and a picture of everyone. So, preach from what you know. Preach to yourself, they say. All right? So, gab sesh usually requires more than one person, so you're going to be part of this. And I begin at least, with the basic question, how's life? So you're going to respond, if you were willing at least, with one word. Normally the word is fine, good. It could be something like sad, bad, terrible. It is what it is. So, I'm going to ask, how's life? Good to hear. Now, in response to my how's life, you're supposed to ask, beautiful. Not me, my life's not beautiful, but that was a beautiful response. My life is I haven't screwed up the sermon just yet. This is really low. I can't see some of you, so this is a different view for sure. Preach from what I know. Well, I'll tell you what. Last night I was on a date because I know dating, right? And so I was on a date, and the guy asked me what everyone asks on a first date or online profiles, and if you're in the dating scene, you know it. The question is, what are you looking for? Well, my first response, or my first instinct, was to say, well, I'm looking for a sermon. Do you happen to have one on you? Now, if you are a young man or person trying to date someone who is not in ministry, asking for a sermon is a guaranteed way not to get a second date. So I ask that you refrain from saying this in actuality. However, what comes to mind? What am I looking for? A guy that has a body of Hercules, the intellect of Stephen Hawking, the humor of Steve Martin, the spirituality of Mother Teresa. Why is that so hard to find? Isn't that common? What am I looking for? Beyond dating. What are you looking for? This is a really weird thing we do. Seriously, if this is your first week, then you can excuse this. But for those of you who attend regularly, this is weird. We go into a building that was really, really old, that doesn't even have windows. Like, you can't see outside. They're painted. They're painted with images of people we don't know. They're stories, for the most part, that we read at least. We gather in and they sit in these long row benches and we go up and down and up and down, and sometimes we sing and sometimes we talk. It's weird. And yet you come, or you came at least this morning. What are you looking for? Perhaps you'd say that I came because it's habit. I've always come to church on Sunday. It's Sunday morning. It's what you do. Some of you might say, well, to see friends and family, to see a community of people that care about me and I care about them. Perhaps you come for the free coffee and you come for the sermon just to see just be curious, be nosy, what's going on beforehand. Perhaps a lot of you, if not all of you, come because you're searching for something missing elsewhere, outside of this really weird building, outside of the really long pews and the sitting and the standing and the singing and the speaking. It's a lot. You're searching and looking. Now, the looking wasn't unique. See, the Magi were searching. Talking about searching, I'm looking for Frances. If you weren't here last Sunday, Frances, a member of our congregation and in seminary, did a fantastic sermon. And I called her and I said, can you just come for me tomorrow? And she said no, she had other plans. She's preaching elsewhere, by the way. But what Frances preached on last week, if you were here and if you weren't, I'm going to catch you up. She preached on a decree that King Herod made after the birth of Jesus. It was to kill the infants in the area because he was threatened of Jesus. The church calendar has specific biblical readings or Bible readings each week, and that was lectionary last week. This week's lectionary reading actually takes us before that story, right before that story. So we don't have King Herod yet doing his stuff. The Gospel of Matthew, as Francis last week pointed out, was written to prove that Jesus was the King of the Jews, the Messiah. And so a lot of what you heard from the scripture was very, very intentional. And I don't necessarily want to get caught up on all those intentionalities, because my point this morning is not to prove to you that Jesus is the Messiah of the Jews. Instead, I want us to look at the story as it is presented. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, it opens, the literal Gospel of Matthew opens with a genealogy, trying to prove that Jesus fits within the Jewish story, the Jewish lineage. Then it talks about how Mary gets pregnant, and Joseph has fears and wants to leave, and an angel appears and says, no, this is the Son of God, stick with it. And then we jump to the Magi, not the kings. We're going to talk about that. We jump to the Magi. No shepherds, no heavenly hosts, no manger, no innkeeper, nothing in the Gospel of Matthew. It is this group. And as I said, misspoke earlier, they aren't kings. We have come to that understanding, and it's a long story about why we come to that understanding. But Magi are purposely not kings. I'll return to that in 1 second. Magi, the word first appears in scriptures in the prophet's book of Jeremiah and also in the book of Daniel, both prophets. And they're musicians. They're not musicians, magic people. Thank you. And so they do magic tricks, and they did rituals, religious rituals. They were the priests of the East kind of thing. Not necessarily tied to the Jewish faith, maybe, but not necessarily so. We don't know. And we really don't know how many of them. They just say the word magi in the scriptures. We don't know. Now, I'm going to make this point just to make it, and then I'm going to move on. There is a setup here going on that Matthew's trying to identify with Jesus. See, Jesus didn't come for the rich and the famous and the royalty. Jesus came for the common folk. And so in the story, it is read that King Herod had the priests and the scribes, aka the elite people. And they were all talking amongst themselves about where they would find this Messiah. Whereas the Magi, the not kings, purposely so, listen to the king. The King Herod is the one that sends them out. So they go, they obey the orders. And whenever they come to Jesus, they bow in reverence. Yes, the Magi had some positions of authority and power, but they weren't on the king level. And we don't know if there were three. The scriptures do talk about the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, so we assume it is three, but we don't know that. So the story I want you to hear is that a group of people came searching for a promise, for a hope, and they followed a star. A star. Can I be honest with you? Sometimes the Bible is really annoying to me. Can I just say that out loud? It's really annoying. That's a great transition, right? Because how easy is it in this day and age if I told you, if you follow a star, you will find Jesus, flesh and blood Jesus, if you follow a star. That's pretty easy, at least compared to my reality. And perhaps if I was a different minister, I would tell you that the answer is if you want to find God, read the Bible every single day. Wake up and you read it for an hour straight. And after 60 days, 600 days, after 6 years, I guarantee you, you're going to find God. But I can't make that promise. You might, but you might not. And perhaps if I was a different minister, I would say, attend church more regularly. Or better yet, since I'm the money guy, give money to the church every single week for the low price of $19.95. You too can have Jesus. But I'm not that guy either. And perhaps, I'm not discouraging you from giving to the church. There is value in that. But I can't promise you that that's how you will find Jesus. I can't say pray more. I can't say volunteer more. What can I say? All those things help us to Jesus, help us to experience God. That's what our tradition tells us. But luckily for us, our tradition is not void of this question. You see, before you and I existed, other people asked the question, how do we find God? And there was a woman, now, I don't know if you attended, about 25 of you participated in a small group in this past fall, led by Bob and Tony, about Teresa of Avila. See, Teresa of Avila was a nun who lived in the 1500s, and in 1588, here and there, she wrote a book called The Interior Castle. She believed or conceived the soul as a mansion, and she thought that there were 7 specifically. And it was a journey inward through these 7 mansions of the soul that you will go and find God. The first 3, I don't know where to put this, the first 3 are about turning yourself away from your flawed and imperfect state to focus on true goodness, absolute goodness, which for Teresa was God. And so it was an active role you played in your prayer and contemplative life, moving towards the divine. The next mansions, 4 and 5, those were where God comes in more active. God starts to lead you closer and closer and closer until you reach mansion 7, which is pure union with God. A central tenet to St. Teresa of Avila's mysticism is that God is intimately present. I want to get the words just right for you, because she writes, real briefly, all harm comes to us from failing to realize that God is near. The kingdom of God is in you. Remember that guy in the wilderness who before Jesus' birth was proclaiming, the kingdom of God is at hand? Well, there are certain people in our own tradition who would tell us that not only is it here now, it's actually inside. A star in the sky. It's actually incorrect. You see, what is actually true, there's another contemplative, a more contemporary contemplative. He would say that that we should meditate and pray and go to the inner room. His name is Thomas Keating. He bases the inner room off of Matthew 6:6, where Jesus proclaims, don't be like the Pharisees. Those religious people, they do what I do for a living, pray in public. Don't do that. Go into a closet, a small room. Let's see if I can figure out this ladder. And go into that small room, that inner room, and there you'll find God. The star is in us. Not in the outside world. Now, if you talk to Thomas Keating and to contemplatives, they'll tell you that God is light, but the journey inward, well, that's more difficult. And this is where the preaching really begins. Everything else I've said so far is just light and laughter compared to what I'm about to tell you, which is if you actually partake in this journey. Well, let's jump back to the Magi for 1 second. They followed a star in the sky, and as a consequence, do you know what that means? They traveled in darkness. They embraced the darkness. What is the darkness for inside? Well, I'm assuming that at least for me, the first thing that comes up is my doubts. I think the Magi, at least one of them woke up one day and said, what the heck are we doing? Are we really going to try to find something in the dark? And if doubt doesn't get you, then I guarantee you, eventually you'll have fear and anxiety. And if you want the real deep one, that's your shame. You know that thing your ego tries so hard to avoid at all costs? People develop mental illness conditions and so forth because they're so afraid of addressing that deep, dark shame. And that's heavy. And that's real. And yet, as Tama would say, the wise ones in our tradition, in our church, would tell us that is exactly where God is calling us to be. Mansion 7 seems so easy. All I had to do was pray. And now here I am. And it's dark. But here's something about the story of the Magi. The hope. The darkness is not all-consuming. The star stays steadfast. They are able to follow it. The star is in you. The light is in you and with you. Emmanuel, God with us. That light will never go out. You may get lost and you may get confused and you may not know exactly where it is, but I guarantee you, I promise you that that light is there. And as, again, Tama referenced, the wise ones tell us that if we stay faithful, if we stay committed, even whenever the road gets hard, whenever the searching becomes overwhelming, we will find the light. And P.S., the light never stays in one place. It's always pushing us, always moving us to more. Because that's what God is. More. We began at Canadian Memorial last fall with a theme or an idea or question, where are you? And Beth has been exploring that in her sermons for the last few months, and we've talked about it in different ways, spiritually, specifically in this space. So I want us to raise that up again, where are you? But add to it for this day, where are you and what are you searching or looking for? Perhaps you know, and congratulations, because there are often times, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. In writing this sermon, I asked myself that, and my answer was, I don't know right now. But I am searching. I am looking. The invitation of this community, friends, is that while this journey is inward and deep, you are not alone, both internally with the light in you, but also externally with a community surrounded with you. So you can say, I am so fearful right now. Or you just pointed out my deepest, darkest shame. And I need your love right now. That's what the promise of this community is. And we all have to live up to that commitment for one another and for ourselves. This is the first Sunday of 2020, a new decade. Who knows where we will be in 10 more years? Who knows where we will be in 1 more year? But friends, in this space, I invite you to come along and perhaps, maybe, you just might find what you're looking for. Amen.